Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the OIS Podcast. I'm Sophia Pathai, MD, PhD, your host for today. And I'm delighted today to be joined by a fellow Brit, none other than Tim Clover, CEO of Rayner. Now, Rayner, as you may know, is a British company and the only manufacturer of intraocular lenses in the UK. So I didn't know this when I first knew of Rayner, so I'm delighted to learn more about the company, but I'm more excited to learn more about Tim. So Tim, welcome to the podcast. Delighted to have you here.
Sophia.
Would love to know, of course, about Rayner, its history and where it's going in the future. But to start with, tell us something about your career to journey to date, because I know you've had quite a history in the ophthalmology business. So take us through your career arc.
Thank you. Actually, about 100 years ago, I did a degree in mathematics and physics and went into R&D in optical physics. And that was my first touch of ophthalmology. It took me about 2 years to realize I really wasn't meant to be in R&D, switched the PhD for an MBA, and then went through a bunch of sales and marketing type roles within mostly Zeiss and Allergan. And then actually I was very lucky to be involved in the spin of AMO from Allergan, which taught me an awful lot, and I think actually made me slightly more entrepreneurial and risk orientated in my choices after that. So this took me through an Oxford University spin out company in more digital health orientated, and then into Fidelity, where I ran a small private equity fund and, amongst other things, bought 20 eye hospitals. So I always sort of drifted away from ophthalmology and then got brought rapidly back. And I joined Rayner in 2014 as a non-exec director to give them an independent view of strategy. And one of the things at the time that was clear was the company was a spectacle retailer and medical technology manufacturer. And it was clear to me, at least, that the company should be the latter, not the former, and focus on that entirely.
So thank you for sharing this wonderful history. And I think two themes really resonate with me. Firstly, you made me laugh when you said that ophthalmology kept on pulling you back in. I think that's something that happens to a lot of us. And secondly, you've not only been a sort of entrepreneur, but you've also been an investor, and now you're a CEO. So I definitely want to dig more into these different career hats and personas that you've been wearing over the years. But first, let's shift to Rayner. And, it's always great to hear about UK innovation. So I'd just love to know more. I remember writing an essay about Sir Harold Ridley designing the first IOL in 1949. And I know he chose Rayner to work with on this groundbreaking innovation. So walk us through what Rayner is and where it's going.
So it started in 1910 with an optical retailer in London. And that original optical retailer was the brand that Harold Ridley used for his own spectacles. So when he had this revelation that he was seeing Spitfire pilots with parts of the cockpit shrapnel still in their eye, but seemingly having no negative consequences, he went to the Rayner optician shop, and the senior designer there, which is a gentleman called John Pike, and Sir Harold Ridley designed this lens together, of which we still have the original in the office, which is quite cool. Yeah. I have to say that the innovation stopped there. So we have sort of display cases full of every type and mixture of potential haptics and designs and optics that you could possibly imagine. I think if one of them had been a lawyer and patented all those designs, this would be a huge business today.
I want to understand, where we're going with the programs that you've designed, like iScience and peer-to-peer. But I think what would be really great for our listeners is to first of all understand, how you've adapted to these different roles, because you mentioned you are initially appointed as a non-executive director, or was it a board member in 2014?
So I was both. So I was the non-exec director on the board.
And so you had to kind of do that role, but then transition to the CEO role as well. So how was that transition? What did you have to manage in terms of change management in the organization as well?
So as I mentioned at the beginning, the organization was slightly schizophrenic because it had hundreds and hundreds of people working in over 200 optician shops. And that's a very different business to the medical technology type business that we all know, probably the people listening to this podcast. When you looked at those two businesses, it was clear that the optical retail business was being negatively impacted by the advent of the internet and by the emergence of large retailer chains. And so one of my pieces of advice was to sell the optical retailer and to focus entirely on this medtech business. We went through that process, and probably one of the unhappy consequences of that is that the factory at the time, albeit FDA approved and CFDA approved, was at full capacity and probably, not fit for purpose for what we consider to be occasion for the next generation. So one of the things we had to do is build a brand new factory. And I have to say, everybody that advised me at the time told me to build that in China or Vietnam. And I'm glad to say we ignored all of that advice and really put our faith in the fact that if you take high-tech manufacturing and automate it properly, you can have an efficient factory anywhere in the world. And that's what we did. So we're now based on the coast of the United Kingdom. I believe that we probably have the world's most advanced intraocular lens manufacturing facility anywhere in the world. We're only about 30% utilized, which scares me sometimes that the place looks so quiet. But then on the other hand, gives us this great confidence that we have many, many years of growth to go through. Today, we manufacture about 1.3 million lenses per year. And the business is at over 30% year and has consistently been for the last few years. So we feel like we're in a good place. And, it's not, even though people know us for IOLs, that's only about 37% of our business today. So we have a much broader portfolio, including obviously OVDs, but also eye drops for ocular surface disease. We recently acquired Omidria from Ameros Corporation, giving us sort of a wider pharmaceutical portfolio. And very recently, we acquired a significant stake in a recyclable instrument provider. So yeah, the company's growing on all fronts.
So this is fantastic. And these are all elements I want to touch upon. But, when I was training as an ophthalmology resident in the UK, I knew of Rayner exactly, as you said, as an IOL manufacturer. So I was quite surprised, to be honest, to realize that the portfolio has really diversified, and particularly so of late. And two elements really resonated with me. Firstly, the foray into patient outcomes via sort of using digital. And secondly, the way you're interacting with KOLs and making sure you're having these peer-to-peer conversations. And then there's a third one, which is about the sustainability sort of perspective. So maybe you can take us through some of these new elements and, what was the rationale? How did you manage to bring them to light? And, what's any early reaction to these?
So having said that we're growing and we've got this more diversified portfolio, we have to recognize we're also actually relatively small in the industry that we operate. So we turn over $200 million each year, which is, considerably smaller than our friends at Alcon and Bausch & Lomb and Zeiss and companies like this. So we have effectively a couple of niches that we operate in. And my belief is that if you're only going to operate in niches, then your obligation is to be the best in that niche. Otherwise, you have nothing to compete with. So some of these other things that we're adding in my opinion, are to strengthen our proposition as being, I hope, the leader in that niche. So for IOLs in particular, if you're producing an IOL, you really need to be able to provide the best visual outcomes to the patient, via the surgery. In order to be able to do that, it seems that you really have to be collecting large-scale data over a 3-year period. And our industry is pretty beset by N equals 50 clinical studies, which is not giving that granularity of data. And so we set about creating this digital health tool that would ideally give 3 years worth of patient follow-up data for every single IOL implanted. And my hope is one day at ESCRS, if you come up to our booth and ask me what the dysphotopsia profile trifocal lens is like, I can click on a screen and say, well, according to 50,000 patients, 50,001 patients,
Absolutely.
This is the data you've got now.
Right.
Go and find anybody that can compete with that depth and substance of data. But of course, that's only us talking, and we recognize that having leading KOLs plus high volume KOLs plus emerging KOLs is really the lifeblood of our industry. And I think we were all excited by the webinars that came about by virtue of COVID, but honestly, I think people are a bit bored of that. That there's quite a lot of jaundice taking place now, and there's such a volume of activity. So we've tried to keep our campaigns as vital as possible, and that's represented by this move to peer-to-peer, which will be a podcast type series. So we've got key leading surgeons. The latest one is Carl Stone Cipher, introducing leading ophthalmologists and discussing not just Rayner products, discussing things that are relevant to all ophthalmologists today. So that's become an important part, and to represent clinical studies are really, really hard work, as you know, to get them right and to design them properly and execute them. So to do that, we've created a standalone organization called iSciences, which only focus is to execute the clinical data and to be able to communicate it in a professional way to surgeons.
I love this, outreach and connectivity with all your stakeholders, right? And I think what was really important for me to hear is that you focused on the high volume KOLs, the kind of really kind of respected, experienced ones, but you also mentioned the emerging leaders as well. And I want to understand from you as well, that recognition that we need to think of the future surgeons of the world. Does that translate into your leadership as well? How do you affect that from a leadership perspective within the organization? And, what plans do you have in the organization to make sure there are emerging industry leaders as well?
Gosh, that was quite a good transition. So actually Rayner's going through, we're at this interesting period, I think, for a company, because 3 years ago we had a couple of hundred employees. I knew everyone, and you were able to really say, well, John or Susan, they're the potential for these jobs in the future. Today we've got about 600 people, and so of course you have to introduce systems and processes to be able to help you with that. And one of the things that I've always been a little less kind of, I hate that kind of mission statement thing, because unless it's embedded in an organization and it means something, and you could ask everybody in the company what's our mission statement and they could repeat it, I think they stand for not much, honestly. So we try to be very much values driven, and we have a bunch of values, and they're not terribly unique. You can find them on everybody else's websites, honestly. But what I think we've done reasonably well is embedding those in the organization. So they're literally everywhere, from our sort of ID cards on every single PowerPoint slide we do. We have a program which rewards employees by other employees, called the Loved Program, Living Our Values Every Day.
Excellent, love that.
Not bad, eh? That's a free one for everyone out there. And I think it's that's something that pulls the organization together. And back to your original question about the sort of future leaders of tomorrow, it's really important for me, at least, that when we're hiring, it's not just sort of individual abilities and performance that matters. It's also somebody coming into the organization that's culturally sensitive and in tune with the values of the organization. I need us to stay, agile and intelligent. And that, I think, is the biggest risk we face as we move from small company to medium to hopefully large. Keeping that entrepreneurial spirit and that speed is I think, is not a trivial thing to do.
Thanks for sharing that. And, I think if I can say, looks like you're doing a good job, because I do see on social media and the various platforms, a lot of your team members are posting about roles that they're doing and they seem engaged. And I did notice that for some new starters, they get socks as well that seem to be in the Rayner colors as well. So maybe that's like, an item that people need to aspire to gain, because they look quite nice.
I haven't got any of those.
You don't have them?
I'm going to go out to HR after this for not giving me a pair of those socks, clearly.
You need to fix that. Yeah, for sure.
I do actually think, though, fun's an important element, isn't it? Because particularly in this day and age when hiring people is kind of hard and you need to keep people engaged. So I have been advocating for years to hire a fund manager. Sadly, everybody made me change the title to employee engagement manager. But we now have Abigail, and she does a brilliant job. And that works globally for everybody. And just bringing people together on, step challenges and things is actually, it's an important part of work-life balance, I think.
Well, I think it is filtering through, because clearly people are sharing their perspectives. And I think we all feel now, when we're leaders or team members or individual contributors, we can share our experience. And it is very clear that, the Rayner experience is something people are enjoying. And I think it's so important when people can, as you say, have fun and enjoy what they do with passion. And maybe the next transition I can take you to then is, you mentioned kind of the global sort of presence of Rayner and its increasing global presence, but sustainability is something that's also a global problem. So I was very excited to read about Rayner's stake in, is it HASA OPTIX from Belgium. So tell us more about that, because I'm not sure if everyone would have seen that in the news. So tell us more about what that means and why it was important for you.
So take two steps back. We when we designed Rayner, I was really aware that what we didn't want to do is get in a fist fight with Alcon for R&D, because we'd lose. I was also a little impatient, and honestly, I didn't want to wait sort of 8 years for the first product to come through. So we intentionally designed this organic network around innovation. So even today, we have about 20 PhDs and engineers in-house. But we have an external network of over 100 people working on our various R&D projects. And our engagement with surgeons is really, really important. And actually, I think it's one of the roles that Rayner can play in the marketplace. Because if you are a surgeon, you have a great idea, you want to bring it to an organization to commercialize it. We offer that sweet spot, I think, between the larger companies for whom maybe 50 or 100 million of revenue is inconsequential, and the smaller companies for whom finding the funds to do a good job of commercialization is a challenge. So we sit there where we're sort of small enough to care, large enough to commercialize with access to external capital. So I spend a lot of time and invest a lot personally in developing that network. And, it's the source of every single product we have launched so far. And HASA was actually no different. So the original introduction came through a very well-known US surgeon who tried these products and rang me up and said, you need to buy that company. They're absolutely fantastic. And on top of that, they, as far as we're concerned or aware, they're one of the only fully recyclable, reusable instruments by virtue of not using any plastics in the production process. So that, of course, got us interested. And when we met them, we saw a like-minded organization with similar values. And that has led to, us taking a significant stake in that company, and we hope together to be able to grow it rapidly over the coming years. But that was something we were interested in generally, and the organization is focused on making sure that our credentials environmentally are sound. So, even from the mundane, like we've got no single-use cups in the building. We all have sort of reusable cups that are used. We have no single-use plastic in the manufacturing process. We're recycling everything we humanly can, like IPA, for instance. So that's an innovative in-house process that we set up to be able to do that. So it's a theme that I hope is running more and more through the company. I mean, it would be nice.
Sharing that.
Well, it would, and honestly, I mean, it's the right thing to do, right? I mean, I have to say we are yet to see it impacting procurement, and I suppose that would be the contentious challenge I would throw out. That at some point, hospitals need to step up and put these on the procurement lists and say, right, we're going to value environmental factors, and they're going to have to quantify that value. Otherwise, I don't see the economic equation for companies to go to that next stage. Everyone's done the low-hanging fruit, but to start doing some of these sort of deeper environmental adjustments, there's going to have to be a sort of recognition that these things are going to have to be prioritized in procurement.
Yeah, I love the way this conversation is going. I feel like maybe we can, as Brits, maybe we're naturally a little cynical or used to the kind of realities of the world. So tell me, we've talked very positively about all the great things that Rayner's doing as a company, but and you've articulated your value proposition in the IOL space and in the ophthalmology space more broadly. But tell me about where you see any potential challenges or obstacles in the landscape. And I don't just mean for Rayner as a company, but I mean for ophthalmology. I mean, you just pointed out that very relevant example about procurement. And I agree with you, we have to take that kind of, it takes a village mentality, and it doesn't always seem like all the players want to play in that nice way. So tell me, from your perspective as one of the eminent leaders in industry here, where do you see the challenges where we really need to club together?
Well, the big one is productivity, I think, isn't it? So, there's a relatively declining number of surgeons, and there's an absolute enormous growth in the number of patients, exacerbated by COVID, of course. But then if you look at the cataract surgery rates in some of the less developed countries, for which I'd include India and China, and you assume some kind of growth towards a mean there, I mean, the numbers are just sort of terrifying for the amount of cataract surgery and beyond that will be required in the next sort of 20 years. And I don't think we as industry are doing a great job of addressing that. We tend to create every new product as slightly more complex, requiring slightly deeper biometry, therefore probably slightly slower and more premium priced. And actually probably what the world needs is a way of moving from 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 cataracts a list up to 20 cataracts a list. So I suppose that there's going to be sort of 3 areas of that, isn't there? One, I suppose, digital, which everybody always says, but I think that's going to be less around technology personally and more around services to be able to increase throughputs. I think there's really going to have to be something about the accessibility of more higher technology implants for the general population. And my suspicion is generally at some point there's going to be a generation defined as, my God, they walked around with pieces of glass held together to wire on their heads. I mean, it's kind of extraordinary if you take 2 steps back and go, we still do that. I think there'll come a time when that won't happen. And then I suppose the impact of genetics will have a sort of major impact in being able to target more efficiently therapies for which at the moment there's a bit of a blunderbuss approach. I think that personally, I think that's sort of the when we look out for the next 10 years or 20 years, that's some of the key themes.
No, these are all great themes, and I agree with you. Digital and the shift towards services. And I think one of our other podcasts, which will come out soon, is looking at cell therapy and how we democratize access for the future sort of cell and gene therapies. Because you're right, we can only address at the moment maybe 0.01% of the population that requires this kind of therapies. And what's your perspective then, just as a sort of interesting aside question? You mentioned looking at doing cataracts maybe to 20, 30 a day. And I know that you've got an office in Mumbai, for example. So would there be any rationale to look for those kind of high volume systems like Aravind or LV Prasad and actually, take learnings from that side of the world where, historically it's seen as less well-resourced, but actually the way they're doing things could have direct impact on the way we deliver services here, fused with the technological advances that we've got in the UK. So what's your thought about how we globalize our learnings and services?
Yeah, I think if I was involved in ophthalmic services, I'd be taking a very, very close look at those systems. And there's a number of different varieties of those, right? And some of them include hierarchies of surgical qualifications doing various parts of the procedure, and others are clearly around the procedure and flow through the hospital. Even within Europe, we see this enormous spread from, as well as I do, if you go into some NHS hospitals, you'll be sort of averaging 5 or 6 cataracts per list. And then if you go to a hospital around the corner, they may be achieving 15. I think that's a really problematic difference in productivity when there is such a built-up demand. And at the moment the independent sector seems to be consuming some of that excess demand, but there's probably going to come a time when that's not sufficient, and the large governmental really high volume systems are going to have to find a way of being able to really change their level of productivity by an order of magnitude. And if I was that hospital manager, for sure, I might be on a plane to Mumbai thinking, well, at least how is this performed here, and what learnings can I take? Yeah.
And your comment about the NHS just reminded me on the UK news. I think this morning I heard a snippet on the radio about our National Health Service. One of our ministers is laying out a new platform of digital services where patients can choose where they have non-urgent surgery. So I think cataract surgery will be one of those. So to your point about going to a hospital maybe 5 or 10 miles away, which can do a far more efficient cataract surgery list, I guess this platform might be informative in that way, but might shift the volume of services. So time will tell how these kind of deliveries and technologies will actually help patient outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you always see this huge difference between the general hospital provision and the specialist hospital provision. I think longer term, if you need to increase productivity, you probably need to go more towards the specialist service provision. I wonder how good the data is at the moment, because the independent sector is a live and impressive industry, and I suspect it's responded quicker than government data suggests. And actually, there may be some surprises coming down the line when they look at waiting lists and realize actually how many have already been provided outside of the system.
So today, I feel like I've learned so much more about you as a leader, but also as Rayner as an organization. Just remind us for our audience who are clearly podcast listeners, when will the Rayner podcast you mentioned, are they already out? And if folks want to listen, how do they manage to access them?
It's through peer-to-peer. So peer, number 2, peer. And if you just put that in Google, you'll find them. And there's a number up there at the moment. The most recent is, as I said, Carl Stonecipher talking to Bill Tatler. And Carl Stonecipher has definitely a second career as a chat show host, because he is phenomenal. So it's an entertaining podcast as well as an informative one.
Great. I'm going to have a listen to that as well. And just one final maybe comment from you or your perspective. You've done so many different things throughout your career, and I'm sure you're going to be doing lots more different things going forwards. A lot of our listeners are either budding entrepreneurs or investors or even emerging ophthalmology leaders in the space. Is there one piece of advice or a learning you'd like to share with this captive audience?
Oh, I don't really see myself in those terms.
You're being too humble.
No, I'm not. Honestly, to be honest with you, I even though I said at the beginning I don't like I wasn't suited to R&D, and I switched I kind of do, and now I find myself completely and utterly incentivized by developing, I hope, great products and making great jobs, because creating 400 jobs in 3 years or whatever is a fabulous thing to do. You see the people out there, it's paying for school fees and holidays and giving people opportunities. Genuinely, that's a level of motivation. And we're so lucky in ophthalmology because it's this fast, dynamic innovation cycle. So I think since I've been CEO for 8 years now, and I think 14 products we've brought to market, and I know each one intimately, and in many of them I was in the first in eye operation, and that's just such a privilege. Mm-hmm. So I guess the one piece of advice I'd do is, if you don't enjoy it, don't bother.
Well said. So, yeah. Tim Clover, CEO of Rayner, thank you so much today for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And make sure you go and see HR for those socks, because you definitely deserve to wear those along the way. Thank you so much for joining.
That's a great tip. Thanks, Sophia. Really appreciate it.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the OIS Podcast. Tune in next week as we chat science, medicine, and industry with ophthalmology's leading experts. Visit OIS.net for more information on podcasts, events, and exciting new features.